Design is leadership.
In recent years, we've begun to see that the most successful organizations are the ones that infuse their business with design at the core.
In our 12-week program, you will hear from and interact with some of the world's most highly regarded design and innovation leaders from across the globe. Our exclusive masterclass sessions will give you insights into how design leaders think and act in order to elevate design in their own organizations to deliver exceptional outcomes.
You will participate in more hands-on workshops with design leaders from your region, in which you will deep dive into some of the theory and practical activities behind the masterclass topics.
The Design Leadership Program is for those who want to learn how to manage and grow their team, develop their design vision, act as an advocate and catalyst for design within their organization, and generally navigate the challenging yet rewarding world of design leadership. We know that the realm of design is constantly evolving.
Our biggest goal is to help you develop the skills needed to become a great design leader who can continue to navigate the ever-changing world of business and society over the next decade.
We hope to see you in Season 2 of the Design Leadership Program.
Just give me one more moment and I'll get back with you guys. Perfect. Now we have it all. It's a lot of stuff to multitask by myself. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Alan, again, thank you for putting this together. I would like to introduce myself and Echoes very shortly, so then the stage is for you to lead. I'm Luna. I'm the program manager for Echoes Design Leadership Program. I'm a strategic design from the Politecnico di Milan. Echoes is an independent innovation lab led by design. We have 3 business models, and the main one, or I would say the one that is hosting this event tonight, is the Echoes School of Design Thinking. We help business to create value and innovate for good. We help people and organizations master and innovate the innovation mindset, skills, and tools. We're global. Most of our presence is in Brazil and in Australia, but I'm in the US and we have a big team growing in Europe. We are part of the Global Design Thinking Alliance. I'm so proud to say that we are part of this alliance, being the only independent innovation lab. It's such an honor to be part of it. And this is Design Leadership. The movie that you just now watched is a 12-week program. We have every single week, we have a specific theme, and this is the journey map. You'll be able to find this information on the syllabus or on the website. We divide it into 4 spheres, which are you as a leader, between you and yourself. So you need to understand who you are in order for you to then be able to unfold your characteristics in your leadership role, as well as you and others. So a lot about you understanding how to listen deeply, how to give feedback, and your interaction with other humans. It's a lot about you and the products and services, meaning the outcome of your designing, and a lot about you and the systems. So the impact that you cause in every single stakeholders that interact with your company or services and products that you share. This is some of our masterclass speakers for season 2 and more to come. The course starts on the 9th of May, so we have pretty much a month to go. It's right around the corner. We still have some spots available, and if you guys want to talk more in depth about the program, please don't hesitate to contact me. By the end of the session, I will share some of my contact information. And today we'll be talking about building a successful design organization. And Alan, I would love for you and your guests to introduce yourself. So the stage is yours. Let me know if you need anything from me.
Yeah, thank you, Luna. And hi again, everyone. My name is Alan. I'll be your host today. As Luna mentioned, I did a program last year for season 1 when I was building out a new UX team at my current company. I got a lot out of it. So I have since then become their ambassador to promote the season 2 program. So if you have any questions around the program, feel free to reach out to me. For today, we're going to be talking about building a successful design organization. And for any design leader, this is something that you need to do at some point of your career. So very excited that we have 2 awesome speaker and panelists today, Ishu and Yan, joining us. A little bit about me before I let the panelists introduce themselves. I've spent the last 10 years in UX, started at a design agency where I got to work with Ishu. We work on projects mostly in the financial space with Morgan Stanley, Bloomberg, ESPN, etc. Then I move on to a startup focusing on VR and AR technology, bring immersive technology to help students find their perfect colleges. And now I work at a bigger enterprise company, extending what I did in the startup to help connect students with their dream school and also help the schools recruit their next class. So again, very excited to have the 2 panelists today. And I've worked with Ishu obviously before. She had led design team at the agency for many years and is now leading a team at Verizon. Yan is a design leader who actively contribute in design communities, who also have extensive experience in agency side and now focus on early to mid-stage startups. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves and then we can dive into the topic. Maybe Ishu, you wanna kick us off here?
Yeah, I think you did half my intro for me with some of That's awesome. So I can build off what Alan's saying. So I basically went from a consulting gig to in-house at the Fortune 20 at Verizon. It's been interesting, and it's funny how timing just worked out. I'm literally redrawing my team's org chart yesterday, and was
wow.
like making notes on the side on like things we can talk about and things I wish I knew. So that's awesome. I head up the retail design side of the house at Verizon now. So that's me in a nutshell.
I guess that would be my turn.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, please, go ahead.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting. I've been following the Ecos Lab since probably end of 2020 when they reached out to me to talk about something else completely different. Who am I? So I've been doing this for almost 25 years. I started way back in late 90s, early 2000s when the greatest and latest thing was web design. No UX, no product, any of these things. And as Alan mentioned, I spent my first half of my career on the agency side. I worked across 5 different countries, 3 different continents with probably slightly over than 300 companies. In that time, then I quit, took a little detour into photography, and I'm not going to dive into that. But at that time, I was drawn by one of my buddies into a tech industry where I served as a mentor at a bootcamp for entrepreneurs called Startup Bootcamp in Israel for a few years. Then when I moved back to New York in 2014, I decided to work at startups and with startups and been doing that ever since. And it was mentioned before, just before me, that good timing, because apart from me building and running a team in my current company, I'm actually consulting another startup right now, recently started, and I'm building a team for them there. That is me in a nutshell.
That is awesome. I think between the two of you, we have covered a very wide spectrum of from design agency, startup, enterprise company. So it's gonna be a good an hour for all of us. So we'd like to kick off the conversation with one of the most common question I get asked, or I ask people when we're talking to design leaders, is who do you report to, right? Are you reporting to product management? Are you an individual department, or report to engineering, right? And there's just many different approaches in terms of how design or UX is organized in different companies. So I thought we can start off the conversation around, maybe you can share how you structure your design organization right now, and maybe any learnings from different approaches. Maybe when you consult with other startup, what are the different approaches that you suggest them when you consider different things, the pros and cons?
Sure. I guess I'll start here.
Yeah.
So first of all, you mentioned, do I report to engineering? My absolute big no. You do not report to engineering, because once you do, that's a disaster on the product.
Yeah.
The way I like to structure my design teams is typically depending on the size, right? Depending on how many people I have. If I have more than 5 people, then I'm going to start implementing in between management. If there isn't, then they're all reporting essentially to me, because typically I hold the position of head of design or anything thereabouts, VP, whatever the title might be. Essentially, the way I build a team, my last company before I left, is creating little pods. And those pods we created little pods for different parts of our product, essentially having each pod to have a dedicated professional, such as iOS engineer, Android engineer, QA engineer, server-side engineer, product manager, and a product designer or UX designer. Among all these teams, typically we'll have 1 or 2 dedicated UX researchers that do not necessarily are part of any of these pods, but everyone kind of come to them for any kind of support in UX research. And then all of that kind of reports up to whoever is head of design or VP of design. That's my approach typically in building those teams. But yes, everything reports to design, not product. That was one of those things that always, every startup that I work with, it's almost a rule, if you will, from my side, saying if you want me on the team, that means that I do not report to your product design. If I report to anyone, that's going to be a CEO or somebody at that level.
Yeah, definitely. Design deserves to be its own thing, and it's a conflict of interest if design report engineering, and it's just hard to do that that way. How about you, Ishu? What are your experiences?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And maybe this is a question back to Ian. Like, have you seen it different depending on the culture of the company or the size of the company? Like, does it affect how people think about structures?
Yeah, absolutely. My last company, I joined I was employee number 7. I was the sole kind of quote unquote designer, if you will, right? Even though at the senior level. And when we started building everything out, we grew to about 65, 70 people. And obviously the engineering team outgrew every other team in the company because we're heavily engineering based. At the same time, we realized that as engineers working on different parts of our product, they need an immediate answer from designers. And so instead of having this kind of a design org where everyone comes to us with questions, we essentially spread out designers to be part of that individual pod. And then once a week to kind of get together and talk about everything going on in each of these pods. Now, in my current company, this team is a little smaller, right? My team is right now 4, was 5 just about a few months ago. In this situation, no, there's no pods. There's only a design team, which has a dedicated UX researcher. It has a UX writer, UX designer, and a product designer. Right? Equally, the company I'm consulting right now, the beginning of that is going to be a UX writer and a product designer. And then we're going to be adding UX research.
Yep. No, it's interesting you mentioned that. And sorry, Alan, if I'm stealing your job. Because I've been talking to a lot of different startups, and it's interesting how they see the relationship of like content strategy or like UX writers researchers and designers, and some of them like separate those as like different categories, and some of them, like how you're describing your team actually has them together. And I can't tell right now like which version is like a better idea, but I do agree with you on the separation of design and engineering as a when support, right? I don't know. It's interesting just to see the different permutations that exist out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's very different between startups and agencies, right? When I ran an agency team, I had 15 creatives on my team, and they're all reported directly to me. I had only one manager in between me and the rest of the team, and they all did everything, right? But back in the day, once again, we didn't have dedicated UX designer or dedicated researcher, right? It was basically, if you're a good web designer, you're doing the research, you're doing the wireframes, you're doing the flows, you're talking to the customer, you're talking to their users and so forth, right? So it's very different back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I think about these things, it's less about if it's like because agency and company is like completely different, right? Like designing a org for an agency. So when Alan and I worked together, I did staffing actually for I remember those days. So I did staffing for our agency of, I think we're like maybe 40 odd people then. But like we were all creatives. So in some ways, like the structure was a lot flatter. It didn't quite matter. But it was also different because you had a project lead versus a career manager. And sometimes they were the same people, sometimes they were different, but it was a lot flatter. Now, I mean, basically it's a 180, right? And in a corporate structure, so I report to the VP of design. And it's such a large organization, but at the same time, I remember when we first joined, design was actually a distributed capability. And it was actually a massive effort to be able to consolidate design as a single, feature that reported up to head of design, right? So back in the days, like, it was a lot more distributed and a lot different. And I think the way I see it in a much larger corporation is also, it's not just the structures of design itself, but also looking at capabilities that come and go, right? So there's a lot of like, we use consultants a lot and we use agencies a lot. So when you think about like teams and structures and you compare that against, the portfolio of work that you have to address, sort of think of them as, two sides of the same coin, right? And you're always trying to like calibrate and like I was doing, redrawing org charts to make sure that whatever team we have is able to support the portfolio of work. If not, something has to give. It could be supplementing it with agencies, which we do work with. It could be basically the hard conversation of like, you're not going to get through this whole entire portfolio of 2022. What are we going to push out? And that's basically this calibrating, right, that happens throughout the process.
Yeah, I think it's a constant occurrence, right? As regardless of the size of the company, there's always kind of a conversation of, well, if you want to move quicker and build more, then we need more people, right? Or don't. And then it becomes this kind of a who's going to give and what's going to give and what and how, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Alan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you for both of your different perspectives. I feel like we can dive into this for the whole session, but I do want to touch on other aspects of the building a successful org, which is working with product and engineering. When we talk about that, right, when we have the design team set up, what are some challenges that you guys see when your design team work with other functions? And what kind of best practices or processes you have in place that makes it easier to work with other two functions? Maybe you can start this one.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's so much driven by the culture of the company. And I think that's going to be my answer for everything. And in some ways, the way I go about these things, and this is where some of my business counterparts make fun of me by being such a designer. And you really approach any problem with the same mindset that you would in designing, a product, right? What do I know? What pieces of it do I have? Where are we trying to go? What do we need to build for that? Where's the gap and how am I going to get there, right? Like it's always the same questions. Whether we're working with product or engineering is really understanding, what already exists, what pieces of it can we change if it exists, like how much latitude do we have? And then on the other side, like where are we going from a business point of view? Like what is it that we're trying to like build out? And that's really where we focus, the team time and energy to figure out, like, does product need more definition? Like, is that something that we need to double down and understand? Or like we already know where we're going. It's really about getting things done, right? And then the focus is really working with engineering. With retail, it's actually a whole other, it makes digital products easy, ironically, because retail has all these layers as it comes to like operations, physical built of like spaces. We call them the fleet of stores, and how things get rolled out, what gets piloted, like when do you test what when, like all of that is actually baked into it. But the way I go about that, it's literally how I'll take on any design project. It's just that you're designing the organization and not just the product, right? But the process of designing it's the same, and collaborating and making sure that people understand all the priorities that you're trying to get at.
Yeah, sounds like you're treating them as the user, so to
Yeah.
speak, right?
Yeah.
What are their needs? What are their goals? How can you help them solve their problems? So that makes it working with them easier.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Anything to add there, Yan?
Yeah, I mean, it's at least from my philosophy on, mind you, my camera does that, by the way, every 30 minutes.
It's okay.
My philosophy in this, it's kind of similar, but instead of kind of figuring out, the processes and whatnot, what I like to do is I like to talk to people, understand how they work, both engineering and product. And depending on the organization, depending on the size of the team, depending on the interest of the team on both sides, it can be something different, right? As an example, my last company, what we did is I spent some time with VP of engineering, and we devised an interesting plan of how to make engineers talk design language and how to make designers speak engineering language. Essentially, we offered courses for both sides. So if engineers wanted to take a course, we'll offer them a course in entry into UX and product design. Equally to my designers, we offered a course in understanding engineering, which means they can go out and take a course in how to code in iOS and Swift, how to code for Android, and so forth. And that way, we essentially had, obviously not everyone immediately ran to take those courses, but we did manage to get at least, if I remember correctly, 3 or 4 people to kind of take the advantage of these courses. So when you put them in the room together, they speak each other's languages. There's no miscommunications. There is no confusions. There is no misunderstandings. If an engineer says that this is going to be a problem, designer already knows why that might be a problem, right? And when designers designing anything, working on anything, they're already thinking ahead how that might be implemented into the product. Now, in the current state, right, our engineering team is not local, which means we have an outsourced engineering team. And the way we work, unfortunately, we had to still do handoffs. And at handoffs right now, what one of the biggest problems we're having is kind of a breakage in communication. So literally today, before this call, we had a massive kind of team meeting on my team to figure out what will be the best approach, and decided to create this massive Figma file that contains all of the screens, the latest ones that go to engineers, followed with annotations and video walkthroughs of every single flow, so there's no kind of a miscommunication. So that's how we kind of figured out how to work on the team with engineers right now. In terms of product, Honestly, I have to say that luckily in the last couple of companies that I've been with, including this one right now, product has been pretty open and pretty kind of understanding of the UX processes. So we didn't have too many problems there.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And thanks for sharing your perspective there.
Sure.
Well, now we talk about org design approaches and how design work with others. If we zoom in on design itself, right, there's the generalist designer and there's a specialist designer. Right, nowadays, I heard people advocating for either. And the titles in our industry is over the place. You hear full stack designer or something specific like UX engineer or UX strategist, right?
Yes.
Just want to hear what is you guys' take on hiring more of a generalist or a specialist? Do you have more success with one versus the other? Maybe Yen, you want to start?
It's a good question, right? Because I am personally a generalist, have been my entire career. I did not graduate any schools for what I do. I'm a college dropout. Granted, I do have associate's degree in graphic design and a diploma as an art teacher in fine arts. However, when I did my associates in graphic design, it was by hand. We didn't have computers. That just kind of gave away my age right away. Equally for, fine arts, no computers. And so I've kind of learned everything on the go, and I've kind of learned everything myself. So I am kind of a generalist because I started with graphic design, did branding, collateral print work, web design, mobile UIs, software UIs. I even worked with Symbian and BlackBerry. Probably for most people here don't even know what Symbian is. So I view it very differently, right, from my perspective. I do like having generalists on my team, but I also like having specialists, which means currently I have a very specific specialist, and that's UX researcher. My UX researcher comes from a scientific background. She doesn't have any idea how to use really Figma or Sketch or any of these tools. She knows how to do research. She comes from a scientific background. That's the sole thing she does. And that is typically what I like to have. I do like to have kind of a general view of things, and in addition to have a specialist in a very specific field, such as UX research or UX writing.
Got it. A good mix of generalists and specialists. So generalists can cover the ground when you need them to wear different hats, and you have a specialist that can do that particular job very well. What's your take on that issue?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think I have a different answer depending on the size of the current team versus, just how much resources can I get access to at any time, right? It's, like I said, you start with the work, the portfolio of projects you're really trying to tackle. And then you look at the people that you have, and then you figure out how you do that matching, right? That's the name of the game, really, in design leadership sometimes. And in some ways, I'm a generalist. Maybe, but I chose to specialize like pretty early on in a field that you have to be a generalist. So it's kind of like a weird in between with design strategy. But I feel like when I think about teams and design organizations, I've honestly seen both been successful. I think the question for each individual to ask is really like, is this company or is this like portfolio of work like where I can apply myself the best, right? I'm making this up, but like sometimes I look at it from the perspective of some products are just not that complicated. You do not need like the degree of specialization. So I feel like when people hit the path, the classic path of if I should go manager, or be a generalist, or cover more grounds, or should I double down in like what I do best and be a specialist? Sometimes when I get those questions, my instinct is what stage of the company are you at, right? Like, are your skill sets needed if you were to choose the specialist route? Or like if you stay a generalist, like, that's always a more natural fit than like agency models, because you can morph into anything the project needs you to be, right? Like, is that where you want to play as well? So I don't think there is a right answer. And in some ways, it's such an individual like decision. And from, when I built teams on the hiring side, I have respect for both. And a lot of times the answer comes down to who I already have, where the team is at, back to what I was saying, what can I change and what can I not? And how does this individual add to the team, whether they're a generalist or specialist? Like that literally is the process that I've been through.
Yeah, I would
Got
agree
it.
with that. It obviously depends on the needs of the product. Luckily, I happen to work with products that definitely require all.
Yeah.
But yes, I would agree. It depends really on what the requirements of the product. Typically, yes, it's something that I would evaluate when I join a company, what exactly the company needs.
Yeah. So the good news from hearing both your answer is there's a place for both, and depending on the company, depending on what your career aspiration is, you can decide which path you take. And going back to Yen's previous answer to my previous question, working with product engineering, right? Being a generalist doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be good at everything, but you at least have to know what the other skill set, the engineering, knowing that iOS coding, whatever, it doesn't have to be a programmer necessarily, but understand how their language can prototype something out. Maybe that's enough, right? So don't think you have to be the jack of all trades and really stretch pretty thin on focus on everything if you want to be on the generalist route. All right.
I would
Let's
also
move on.
add,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I would also add
No
to
problem.
that part of a generalist versus specialist. And I might be correct here, but typically generalists are more sought after in smaller companies or agencies, such as agencies and startups. And specialists are more sought after in big companies. So if anyone on this call is considering which way I should go, you should probably consider which way you want to continue your career. Do you want to build your career in smaller companies like I did? Like, I love startups. That's my natural habitat. I just enjoy being in that kind of a chaotic, crazy world of let's build something. We don't know what, but let's build something.
Yeah.
Or do you want to be in this kind of established company that knows the course? They know where they're going, and they'll be going there for the next, not 100 years. And that will probably inform you a little bit which way you should be going.
That's a good point. I think I'm more like you. I thrive in ambiguity and change. Like, every day is different.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next topic, which is a big one. I want to talk about hiring, onboarding, and retention. Maybe for the sake of time, let's focus on hiring and retention first and see if we have time for onboarding. As you all know, this is a crazy market right now, and a lot of the design leaders are struggling to attract talent in this competitive market, as well as retaining the ones they have. Is there any tips that you guys can share with the group here that make your hiring process successful, or something that I think is pretty helpful for us to know when it comes to hiring a new team member or retaining them on your team? Maybe Ishu, you started this one?
Yeah, no, I literally just had 2 designers start this week. So I've been in this world for a bit. It's exciting.
Congrats.
And I think maybe thinking about what we were just talking about, literally how I pitched the job to them, because it goes both ways, right? Is that even though Verizon and the design team is large, my team's actually like the smallest of the lot. It is pretty much like a startup environment within this much larger design team. And what is fascinating and interesting was how that messaging really clicked for people, right? So in some ways, like, they have the latitude and the freedom to try a whole bunch of stuff and be messy, but be in an environment that there is like stability from a job and career growth perspective, right? So it's it's interesting how that somehow became, I guess, what I used. I don't think I was that intentional about it. I just was describing, the situation that I'm in, and building a small, nimble team that can deal with a lot in a new world of like retail. And somehow that message really worked and really stuck. And we found good people. So I don't know if that's helpful because I don't know if it can be replicated, but it is a hard time to be hiring. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I think sometimes being small forces you to be clear around your culture, your people, you know what the value is, versus a bigger org where it might be harder to encapsulate that feeling of culture when you have 200 people working for a common purpose. So
Yeah.
that's good to hear.
Mhm.
How about your experience, Yan?
Wow, that's a topic that I've been talking a lot recently about. I'm going to start with the fact, or kind of do a mention of the fact that I am considered to be a little bit controversial in that area of how I hire and how I source people. As an example, when I write job descriptions, I do not write job descriptions. What I write is essentially what I'm looking for as a human being, and I don't care what they work. I don't care what kind of experience they have coming with. I don't care if they know how to use Figma, Sketches, or anything else. And I typically don't really care how much years of experience they have. And that's kind of
interesting.
Touches the note to people of like, hold on a second, but how do you, well, it's very simply, I believe in, my philosophy around this is very simple. I want to hire a person I can work with, person that designs for the sake of design, not because I have a great brand name of a company, not because my product is sexy, not because I am as a leader attractive to you because you've kind of been following me on LinkedIn or anywhere else, but because you just want to design, regardless how much you're getting paid. Obviously, we pay people and pay well, but at the end of the day, I'm probably being biased towards the fact of who I am and how I got into this industry. For the first 2 years of my career, when I just started out, I was struggling. I worked odd jobs. I worked at a gas station night shifts. I worked at a factory where I assembled one of those machines that swallow your bill in a vending machine. And when I decided to become a web designer, it was probably the worst time ever. It was the end of 90s, early 2000s, right after .com collapse. No one even knew what's going to happen with that thing called internet going into the future, right? But I just wanted to be it. I didn't care if I ever going to make money. I didn't care if I ever going to be able to build a career in it. I just wanted it. I passionately wanted it. And so typically when I hire, I'm looking for people like that. I'm looking for people that will, as bad as it might sound, will eat the ground from underneath them, but deliver the best product they could possibly can, right? And so my job descriptions do not talk about years of experience. My job descriptions do not talk about list of software you're going to be using or tools or whatnot. My typical job descriptions talk about what qualities I'm looking for: passion, compassion, empathy, hunger, curiosity, inquisitiveness, and the list goes on, right? And so when I meet people, when I talk to people, when I hire people, those are the people that I'm looking for. And typically, thus far at least, I've been successful in finding people that are my team that just surprise me of how great they are, right?
Yeah,
equally,
that's very.
yeah,
Go ahead.
equally goes for the conversation of it's hard to hire right now. And they literally recently published an article on UX Collective talking about the fact that last year I reviewed 370 applications for 2 positions.
Yeah, it's a harder time for us. But it's interesting that you mentioned your perspective. I love and admire your openness, and just anyone could contribute if they are motivated and they're behind your company's value and all that. Curious to see if you have any special interview process that allow you to vet the actual technical skills. For example, you mentioned you don't have to know Figma, whatever, but do we just trust them that they know, or is there any special way that you gauge that passion or those attributes you mentioned that you're looking for in your new hire?
Sure. I'm not going to open all my cards.
Okay.
I don't want people to be ready. It's a recording, probably going to go public somewhere.
Okay.
So I don't believe in giving people homework. I, as a designer, every time somebody said to me, when I used to be just an individual contributor, looking for a job, and somebody says, design me a homepage and give it and send it to me tomorrow, I would always say, design it yourself. You saw my work, you saw my portfolio, you know my history. If you don't trust that, then I'm not for you. Simple as that. Now, I do test people during the interview process. I'll give them a small task. Typically, I don't know, here's a form. You have exactly 30 minutes to design it. It's not me trying to gauge how fast people can design. It's a little bit, but I want to see how people take this kind of a blank wireframe and, for instance, put it into UI if it's a product designer. If it's a UX designer, here's a missing piece in the flow. Complete it, right? And then I let them choose whatever tools they want to choose in order to do that. And while they're doing that, that's how I see which tools they go for. Sketch, Figma, XD, whatever the case might be. So yes, I do try to see if people do use tools. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me because we can teach that. In terms of finding the kind of the diamond in the rough, if you will, there are two things that I do. I'm going to unveil one of them. I'm not going to unveil the other one. The one is I do a 30 circle exercise. I don't know if anyone here knows what that is. Yes? No?
Maybe explain to the group.
Sure. So 30 circle exercise is a very fun way of figuring out if the person has kind of a eyesight, holistic view of a problem and how their brain works to immediately produce an enormous amount of solutions or ideas to that kind of a problem. What you do essentially, you create 30 circles, just a blank piece of paper, and you give people exactly 3 minutes to convert as many circles as they can into recognizable objects. That's it. No one completes all 30 circles, which is fine. That's not the goal. The goal is to see how many can they complete in those 3 minutes, and how do they convert those objects, those circles into recognizable objects. For instance, if I see somebody completed 15 out of them, let's say, or 10 in those 3 minutes, but each one of them is something completely different and not related, like an apple, orange, watermelon and stuff like that. That's a diverse thinking. If I see people connecting those circles, creating, I don't know, classes, or putting a car with wheels in between, that's an outside the box, holistic view and understanding a solution of the problem. So that's how I test that part. Not going to say the other one. Sorry.
Yeah, well, we at least get one secret out today, so thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
I'm going to look that exercise up later. All right, I think just because of the time, I'm going to move on to our last question. Again, if you didn't see my chat, we'll be open up for Q&A soon. So if you have any questions for Yishu and Yan here, feel free to jot them down. The last point I want to touch before we open up is to talk about how you measure success, and not only the success of the design work necessarily, but just higher level, the success of the design team. If you were to talk to your manager and say, how do you prove that the org or the design org is function in a well enough? What are the signs that is not? And maybe to talk about how do you measure success will be very beneficial.
Unfortunately, I have a hard stop in literally a minute, so I'm gonna have to run. But I'm gonna try and answer this question really quickly.
Okay.
Impact on the product or a feature. That's how I measure success in my team. How much of an impact we created within X quarter or half a year or a year. And I think that's kind of a simple approach.
Very direct and
yes. Thank you. I unfortunately have to run. Thank you very much for inviting. It was a pleasure. It was fun. Have a blessed and great rest of the week.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank you
Ian.
for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. All right, issue, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same. I think being able to triangulate, and I think it's harder, arguably, as the organization is bigger, because many people are measuring many different things, and you have way more, um, not like in a good way, but way more opinions and way more perspective, on what success means, right? But what I really try to track down to its impact, much like what Yen was saying, impact of the product. I look at data. It's that can't lie. But how you measure data also becomes biased, and we have to be careful how we count. Because what you measure is basically what you become, right? I think that balance of what is launched, what is in the hands of customers, what are people truly experiencing, impact. I think it's how, and I feel like for designers, you're talking about retention and all of these different metrics. Like that is what that's that's why people became designers, so that they can have an impact on people, right? One of the big frustrations, and I know this even from the days we were working together, it's when you work on a lot of like vision and conceptual stuff and things don't make it out to the market in the hands of designers and people are truly using it and experiencing that, that is a source of frustration. And granted, like, different parts of the organization measure these things really differently. Um, for the teams I run, the projects that I've influenced over, like that is the specific kind of impact that I'm measuring. Like how has a customer benefited from whatever we have put out there, right? And balancing it of like, this is why you do vision and conceptual stuff, because you're helping the company be able to get from point A to B, right? You need to know where you're going, but you also need to track what you're putting out and then figuring out like if that vision still holds or not. Like constant validation. It's how I measure success.
For sure. I love how you went to the success of the user, what kind of impact you made for the user, not talking about the business value, like not necessarily, of course they bring that leads to revenue or business value, but focusing on the user and really measuring that, visualizing that for designers so they know their impact, that helps retention. That makes a lot of sense. And I do remember in the older agency days when we have a great design and the client just take it and we don't know whether they implement. It's sometimes not the best in terms of your feeling of contribution to the world.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all the insights. And now we have some time for Q&A. I don't think I saw anything that came through the chat, but if you would like to unmute yourself and ask questions to Ishu, I'll try my best to channel my inner Yen since he's not here. But any question you have for the group, feel free to verbalize them.
One at a time, everybody.
One at a time.
I would extend the question and say that if not for issue, but anything related to the program itself, or maybe questions that you could answer, Alan, as not only a head of designer, but also alumni, maybe people could also jump in.
Yeah. Any questions? Thanks, Glenn. Glad you can join us.
Caro just asked you a question, actually. She said she's starting a new job as a head of design at a company without a current design function. They use agencies. What do you recommend establishing first?
Ooh.
Do you have any designer under you, Caro, right now, or is only agencies, or you're the only? Okay. Ishu, do you want to take that one? Seems like you were about to say something. Sorry.
So I feel like the technical term here is insourcing, as opposed to outsourcing. If they're removing an agency and moving it in, I think the first question, and I'm sure Alan, you have more to add. The first question is really understanding why. Like, why is that a decision to insource it instead of staying with an agency? Like, is there some degree of efficiencies? Because it in some ways it's a business decision, right? Um, from a efficiencies point of view, like what are they trying to gain? And just getting really real about if that is, if that is something that can be accomplished, and what kind of relationships do you need to build to be able to accomplish that? Can you reveal what kind of company that is? Okay. Yeah, I don't know if industries quite matter as much as just stage of growth. Um, is it in a startup type situation? Gotcha. Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm guessing. So the efficiency there that they're trying to really get out of, hiring in-house, right? It's the ability for nimbleness and that you'll be able to move faster and be able to, well, what Yan was alluding to, like work more directly with engineering and product, so the turnaround cycles will be faster. That's my guess. But I think that's the first question when you're in there to ask, and build those relationships. If that is true, like help them understand how they're going to be measuring scale and success and everything that we're talking about earlier. So you are able to track, back to impact. You're able to track how are you contributing to what they're trying to get out of this role, right? Because the first one in, you're testing it. The goal is that you're trying to get more funds, more resources to be able to grow your team, right? Like that's the name of the game. And I think being able to understand like why did they choose to do that, and then figuring out how you're able to help them achieve those goals, I think it's the first thing that I'll be establishing if I was you.
Yeah, I will also say one practical approach is to look at the current ratio. You mentioned 30 people in total of engineering product managers, so you can figure out how many people you need to hire upfront. Generally, a 1 PM to 5 to 10 engineer ratio is good. And you can say maybe you need 1 or 2 designers, so you have evidence that's why you need 2 or whatever many, and make the case for that. Going back to generalist and specialist, sounds like you would need some generalists in the beginning to cover some grounds. You might not have budget to hire a special user researcher, but the research will become very important pretty soon. Right now, in my case, I have 4 designers under me. They all have to do research to a certain extent. We're about to hire a dedicated user researcher, so lucky me for next fiscal year. But yeah, I had to really advocate for that for a while before that becomes a reality. So that's where we'll come in, having some data to back up your ratio. Start with a generalist to get a ground rounding and start contributing. The more you can establish quick wins and you can unlock headcounts, and sometimes you're going to scale massively. You have to scale with other 2 groups too. So if you have to be involved in the planning session with the other functional head, if they grow so much, you have to catch up. Otherwise, there's an imbalance, and that leads to frustration pretty quickly. That's just my 2 cents. All right, I think we're at time. If there's no other questions, Luna, you wanted to finish us off here?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much. It was inspiring. I mean, I've never led my design team yet, and I'm hoping to get there. So just by listening to you guys, I feel like I am setting the tone for my future. But in any case, for those who are still here, I would like to extend a 15% off discount for participating in the webinar today, in case you are planning on signing up for the course. And this is my email. Please feel free to either contact me via email or find me on LinkedIn. I'll be so happy to sit and have a conversation about design and leadership and how companies are growing and what I've been listening through the fire sessions and previous alumni and the new students. I would also like to share with you guys the ebook from our first season. And before the launching of the program, so in 2 or 3 weeks, we're launching the second version of the ebook. So make sure to download this one so you also receive the updated version once we have it launched. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for putting everything together, Alan. It's such a pleasure to collaborate with you. Ishu, you're amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Have a good night, everyone in the East Coast. It's only 5 p.m. in San Diego, and I'm going to watch the sunset now.
Jealous.
All right.
All right.
Jealous
Thank you
too.
so much for having us. Bye.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.